So good evening, everyone. I'm Brad Joy. I teach English here at school, and I'm the head of the school. And I'm very happy to have Kurt Thompson here with us tonight. And I should highlight that this is the 10th year that we, St. Paul MBA, have had a relationship with the Trinity Forum. And what wonderful speakers we've had. Last spring, Arthur Brooks, we had David Brooks, Cornel West, Robbie George, Dana Joya, one of my favorites, and many, many more. And it's just been a wonderful time to bring people together from the community, people from different paths who want to hear individuals like Kurt talk about good ideas. And we are grateful to the Trinity Forum and appreciative of this relationship, and we hope you'll enjoy the night. So I think at this point, I'm going to ask Cherie to come up, who's become a great friend over these past 10 years and does a great job. Please join me in welcoming her to Nashville.
Well, thank you for that very gracious introduction, Brad. It has been such a delight to get to work with you and with Will for almost 10 years now. Just a really rich collaboration. And welcome to all of you to tonight's sold-out evening conversation on beauty, trauma, and the healing power of presence with Kurt Thompson. As Brad was saying, it is so good to be back in Nashville. We had to take an enforced 2-year or so hiatus, so it's just a real kind of delight to be back, to resume the collaboration and partnership that we formed with St. Paul and with MBA. And it's lovely to see so many friendly and familiar faces once again. As we start out, I'd like to thank the sponsors who have helped make tonight's program possible, and indeed this 10-year series. There's several of you, but you are well worth the recognition. So particular thanks to friends Mary and Lee Barfield, Janet and David Chestnut, Jessica and Kevin Douglas, Ashley and David Edwards, Rebecca and Al Gonzalez, Chrissy and Bill Haslam, Elizabeth and Bill Hawkins, Eleanor and Eric Osborne, Molly and Ed Powell, Carol and John Rochford, Anna and Giff Thornton, Heather and Morgan Wills, the Foundation's Creed and Culture Fund, as well as the Cheris Foundation, and our corporate sponsors, Sims Funk and Gaw Properties. So thank you to each and every one of you. I'd also like to give a quick thanks and acknowledgement to Byron Smith and Sam Funk, two of our trustees who are here, who have done so much behind the scenes over the years to help sustain as well as envision and develop this initiative. And I'm so excited that each and every one of you are here. We actually sold out a while ago, and I know that quarters are somewhat cozy. So, and because we had to shut down registration, we are live streaming this. So if you have friends who wanted to be here, were deterred by the fact that it was shut down, feel free. We rarely encourage people to text, but this is an exception. Feel free to text them to let them know that this will be live streamed tonight. You can follow along by simply logging on to MBA's live stream page, and then we will also have the video for this up and going very quickly, both on our website and on our YouTube channel, as well as the MBA channel. For those of you where this is your first time here or otherwise new to the work of the Trinity Forum, we seek to cultivate, curate, and disseminate the best of Christian thought and provide a space for leaders to wrestle with the big questions of life in the context of faith, for the purpose of ultimately getting to better know the author of the answers. And we hope that what happens tonight will be a small taste of that for you today. Those big questions that so often occupy public attention are usually, and not surprisingly, political. But it seems increasingly undeniable that many of our most difficult civic challenges are actually rooted in unmet or distorted spiritual and relational longings. Take, for instance, the steep rise in reported feelings of loneliness, rejection, and shame, which have both fueled and been reflected in nationwide spikes in anxiety and depression, particularly among young people. Loneliness and shame have accelerated our search for a sense of belonging in online tribes and partisan warfare, furthered our divisions, intensified our sense of self-protection and interest in seeking to dominate others, and contributed to the poisoning of our public and particularly online communication, as anonymous comments and tribal bullying have grown so widespread as to normalize the failure to accurately see, hear, or understand each other. Shame and loneliness are, all too often, both alienating and contagious. But as our speaker tonight will discuss, there is another way. Drawing upon a research focus in neurobiology and decades of clinical experience as a practicing psychiatrist, helping clients longing for transformation in their own lives and relationships, he argues that beauty can emerge from places of trauma, and that learning to see and be seen by others in community opens wonderful new possibilities for healing, wholeness, and extraordinary creativity. And he illuminates the way in which a confessional community can reshape our imaginations and reveal new possibilities for better knowing and loving God, ourselves, and each other. It's a deeply hopeful vision, and there are few who can share it with the expertise, empathy, wisdom, or wry humor as our speaker tonight, Kurt Thompson. Kurt is a psychiatrist in private practice in Virginia, as well as the founder of the organization Being Known, which helps people explore the connection between interpersonal neurobiology and Christian spirituality. He is board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, and has focused his clinical practice on the treatment of adults and families with a particular research interest in the integration of psychiatry and neuroscience with spirituality and the emerging field of interpersonal neurobiology, and now trains others in that field. He is a sought-after speaker and consultant, the creator of the Being Known podcast, which we highly recommend, and the author of the excellent books Anatomy of the Soul of Shame, and his most recent work, The Soul of Desire, Discovering the Neuroscience of Longing, Beauty, and Community. And he is also, I am quite proud to say, a senior fellow of the Trinity Forum. After Kurt gives keynote remarks, St. Paul headmaster Will Norton will pose the first question and then moderate questions from the audience. Kurt, welcome.
Well, it is great to be in Tennessee. I mourn. Anybody here a Tennessee fan? Yeah, no. There's no shame. Not in this room. No, not in this room. I'm an Ohio State Buckeye fan. I'm just trying to get it all out there, get this taken care of before, so I can talk about the beauty of the passing attack for what happens at Columbus and the Horseshoe. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to Cherie and to everyone who's hosting for the kind invitation to invite me to come. I always feel honored and humbled. If anybody here would consider themselves to be a Jesus follower, and you take the scripture seriously, then we find out that when Jesus says, where two or more of my followers are gathered, there will I be also. He didn't really ask if we needed his, he didn't ask for permission to come. He's just going to come, and he's going to work. And so I'm grateful that we all have come, because I think that what we are about, if we are followers of Jesus, if this is really what we're here to talk about from a thoughtful Christian perspective, if that's the case, then what we are really about is about the way that he wants us to think about the world and our place in it, and what does it mean for us to create outposts of beauty and goodness in this world that is so currently traumatized. And so if there are this many people here, I would consider that everybody here is also longing to have answers to these questions in order for us to do together what God has called us to do, which I might say is really hard to do. And so, as we like to say in our business, the brain can do a lot of things that are really difficult for a really long period of time, as long as it doesn't have to do it by itself. And so we will eventually get to this question of community, but I want to say tonight that we all first come with a great longing. We are here tonight because we long for things. And in fact, that longing begins the moment that you come out of the womb. Babies come into the world longing for things, right? They come in. Anybody here given birth to a baby? 4 of you. Okay, great. Wow. Babies come into the world looking for things, right? We say that they long for physical appetites to be resolved. They also long for other things. We like to say in our work that children long for 4 things. That begins with the letter S. They long to be seen, soothed, safe, and secure. And that longing never stops. That will only stop when you're dead. This longing to be seen, we have to first see children if we're going to then actually do anything for them. If we're going to soothe them, they first have to be seen. There are people in this audience who have parts of you that have yet to be seen, that have yet to be seen even by the people that you're married to, by the people that you work with. We already sense that the Spirit of God is in the room and at work, because we're raising questions about in what parts of my own life am I not yet seen. Infants look for this because once they're seen, then they can be soothed, because we can't soothe them until we actually see them. But once we do see them, we come to be soothed, and they have all kinds of needs to be soothed that we can easily identify. And then as we age, as adults, we find ways to hide those needs to be soothed. We hide them effectively until we burn so much energy trying to manage those things that we've been needing to be soothed for such a long time that we can't cope anymore, and then you find yourself in my office. Now, granted, I'm not complaining. It's good for business. Anxiety is, I feel like I'm in some movie. Anxiety is good for business. It's not really good for business, but you know what I mean. That there is a sense in which when we are not soothed by someone else, we are going to have to take that upon our own. And as it turns out, the brain is made primarily first to be soothed by someone else. When a baby comes into the world, about 85% of her neurons or of his neurons are not yet able to do what they need to do until they have interaction with another human brain. That means only about 15% of what a baby comes into the world with ready to do, they're able to do on their own. All of the rest needs cooperation from whoever it is that's taking care of them. This changes over time. But as we say, every child comes into the world looking for someone, looking for them, and that never stops. If first I'm seen, then I'm soothed, then I can be made to feel safe. Now, I want to say here that the word safe has come to a place where it's now fairly often misappropriated. In many respects, for me to say that I feel I'm only safe if I'm doing the things that I want to do. The moment that I don't want to do something I don't want to do, I say I don't feel safe. It's a euphemism for I feel afraid and I don't want to do the thing that I'm afraid to do. It doesn't mean that I'm actually not safe. It means I'm afraid. But it is still true that safety needs to be created. And parents, anybody who's been a parent knows that you're going to keep your child safe from things that are outside their skin that might harm them. They don't want to have things happen to them that they don't need to have happen to them. But the other way that they need to be protected is from themselves. A child who's 2 who's not actually protected from themselves will run into the street. There will be all kinds of things that I will want to do on my own that you need to say no to. Safety isn't just a one-way street. It's not just protecting me from the things that are outside my skin that are coming toward me. It's the things that are within me that are going to come out toward you. Safety is a matter of what's happening both to me, but what I'm bringing into the world. And if I'm safe, eventually, if I've been seen and I'm soothed and I'm safe, then I can become secure. And to be secure means that I take my sense of safety and I walk outside of this house and I go do things that are hard to do. I do things in which I actually take risks. I might even make mistakes. I get my nose bloodied. I get my knees skinned. I might hurt people's feelings. I get my feelings hurt. But then I can return to a place where I'm seen, soothed, and safe so I can do this all over again. I am therefore being commissioned by being seen, soothed, and safe. I'm being commissioned to securely go and create beauty and goodness in the world where it will be risky to do so. And the reason it's risky is not just because we're humans, but because we live in a world in which evil has no intention of beauty ever emerging. Now, this notion of those 4 S's, again, happened for us, and it's true for us until we're dead. In what ways are any of us here, this is important for us to get through our comments tonight, in what ways are you not being seen, soothed, made to feel safe, or are you secure? Those are important questions for us to be answering, because if we can't answer those questions for ourselves, it will be impossible for us to maintain what is necessary for us to be agents of creating beauty and goodness in the world. We can't give what we don't have. Now, here's an interesting thing about development. At some point, the child who is seen, soothed, and safe, they're going to start to... Do your children ever make you anxious? Look, I tell people, children are born to drive you crazy. And that's what we're here for, to help parents not kill their children. This is why we're here, to help parents not kill their children, because children will have their own sense of wanting to go into the world and do all kinds of things that will make us anxious. But before long, before making us anxious, they will also start to do things that you don't have to teach them to do. And the thing that they will want to begin to do is they will start to make stuff. Do you notice? A child will walk into your kitchen and they will have created something on a piece of paper. You have no idea what it is. They want you to put it on the refrigerator and they want you to call the neighbors and charge money to come and see it. They think it's like Van Gogh. They think this is the best thing since anything that's come out of France. Children do not need to be taught to make things because, as it turns out, we are made to make things. We have this deep longing to make things, and they're not things of mediocrity. Our children bring things to us that they want us to be excited about. And children and artists show us what our mission in the world is to be. We are to be like our Maker. Now, when you open the very first page of the Bible, you know, it's like, as I tell people, it's like turning on a TV and the programming is already running. There's no like long on-ramp to it. You turn the program on and there it is, and God's making things. And we see that when he makes things after day 1, day 2, and day 3, he pronounces that it's good. But the other way that you can read the Hebrew word for good is the word beautiful. And he saw that it was beautiful. And he had a party. And then he went to the next day and he saw that this was beautiful. And he's not seeing that it's beautiful just because he notices that it's beautiful in its object reality. Its beauty emerges as a function of God looking at it. Here's a question. When in the last week have you noticed that your beauty is being called forth because someone is looking at you, and not in a way that is consumptive, not in a way that is exploitative? God sees beauty in the middle of all of the chaos over which he is hovering. This is verse 2 of Genesis chapter 1. And the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the deep. And then he began to bring order and purpose. And I want to say to us that our work as human beings, this is what children grow to do. They learn to have these longings to be seen, soothed, safe, secure, so that they can go out into the world and name things and bring purpose to them. And I don't care if you're an attorney, if you're a teacher, if you're a construction worker, if you're a farmer, if you're a stay-at-home parent. This is what we are called to do, to be image bearers of our God. This is what it means for us to bring beauty and goodness into the world. And children teach us how to do that. We know that things are beautiful easily when we see beautiful things. We see beautiful sunsets, we see beautiful artwork, we see some artwork, we don't know what it is. But we are still having to look and train. But some of these things that we look at, we just know that this is a beautiful thing, because we know that beauty comes to us quickly and easily as, first of all, wonder. Beauty captures us as a matter of wonder. These longings to create beauty in the world, not just objects, but ourselves included, starts with wonder. you ever been in a conversation with someone else that's just been rich and deep, and you get to the end of the conversation and you are just full of wonder that this last 20 minutes, this last 2 hours has happened? Beauty is first wonder. And the second thing is that it's welcome. Beauty doesn't set up restrictions. Beauty welcomes you. I don't know how many sunsets you've seen that you've really enjoyed that it says like, no, you can't look at me, I'm too beautiful. It's wonder, it's welcome, and eventually it's worship. Because what beauty is doing is that it's pointing us to something beyond itself. This is what we were made to do. And as it turns out, that creative sense was all present at the end of Genesis chapter 2. We like to say that when we are going to create beauty in the world, there are at least 3 things that are maximally helpful for it. First of all is that we like to create beauty as a way of having different things coming together. And the man and his wife were naked and unashamed. You read this at the very end of Genesis chapter 2, the second page, second and third page of the Bible. Genesis chapter 2, we see this. It's primal. The man and his wife. Now, I tell folks, so I've been married for 36 years. And I love my marriage. I absolutely love my marriage. But, people here are married? Some people are married? And you're admitting that. Okay, good. And are you here with people that you're married to? Even more so. And, you get married, and then, 6 days, weeks later, you like it dawns on me. Like I thought I was wanting to marry Phyllis. And then as it turns out, I didn't really want to marry Phyllis. I wanted to marry me. I just wanted me to look like Phyllis. I wanted someone who thought like I thought. I wanted someone who hung the toilet paper like I hung the toilet paper. I wanted someone who got to movies 15 minutes ahead of the start time. You see, I didn't want to marry someone who was differentiated from me. Well, okay, the sex thing was okay. But as far as that, but other than that, you see what I mean, right? There's this sense in which what I really want is just to be doing creative work with people who think like I think. But we have to recognize that beauty in its most durable form begins with creating with those who are different than us, with material that's different than me. And the second thing is that they were naked. They were vulnerable. The Hebrew for the word naked is not just speaking to the questions of physicality, it's also speaking to the question of protection. I, in my vulnerability, need you to protect my dignity. I need you as a resource because I do not have everything that I need in order for me to create beauty and goodness in the world. I'd like to think that I could, but that's not what we are intended to do. In fact, the way that your brain is even arranged, the way that it comes online, it does so in such a way that it needs other parts of the brain. In fact, my brain won't come online in an appropriate way unless I have contact with yours. I need that differentiation if beauty and goodness are going to emerge. And the third thing that we need is the absence of shame. The husband and his wife were naked and unashamed. What parts of our lives do we look around at and we say, gosh, all I see is extreme fracture. There's no connection between differentiated parts. Shame is living everywhere, and vulnerability is nowhere. But this is how we were designed to create. And unfortunately, we turn from the second page to the third page of the Bible, and we have trauma in its longest and worst ways, because the most powerful and the most prominent trauma that takes place in our kitchens, takes place in our bedrooms, in our boardrooms, takes place amongst the elders in our church. It doesn't just take place between Russia and Ukraine. We like to talk about trauma being something that stands on 2 pillars. The first thing is that any of us who've had any experience which we A, feel overwhelmed by the situation, and B, in our sense of overwhelm, we also have no agency to change it. Now, most of us can name all kinds of things in the world that are heinous in their traumatic impact. Sexual abuse, rape, war, poverty, a range of different things that we all identify. What we often don't identify is that most trauma for us takes place in very micro moments throughout the course of most of our lives, that we find other ways to cover up But once we've covered it up, we then have to burn lots of energy to contain it in order for us to cope with it. And that is energy that we then do not have available to create beauty and goodness in the world. One of the most important things that trauma does, and we see this in this scene in Genesis 3, one of the most important things that it does is that it tends to shatter our capacity to imagine. When trauma enters a person's world, and this can be political, this can be in the classroom, this can be anywhere. When trauma enters a person's world, it doesn't just make me feel uncomfortable. In wielding shame, trauma doesn't just make me feel bad, it makes it impossible for me to accurately perceive the nature of my story as it really is and as it can be going forward. We humans have this interesting thing about us in that we tell stories like no other animal that we know of, at least unless you're in a C.S. Lewis novel. As far as we know, we are the only ones who tell stories about our past and about our future. Squirrels do remember where they placed the acorns. As far as we know, they're not having conversations with other squirrels about how last year's harvest was compared to this year's. They're not telling stories in that way. But we are telling stories all the time. In fact, we can't not tell them. We are always in the business of trying to make sense of what we sense. And here's the thing. If I don't have much experience being seen, soothed, safe, and secure, I'm going to tell you a traumatic story that's only going to have one ending. And the ending is going to have me and you being alone and at each other's throats by the end of the day. And how do we know this? We know that what began as a simple taking of the fruit in Genesis 3 led by Genesis 4 to murder. And by Genesis 6, it led to the development of empire. Empire that was intending to abuse everybody else around it that wasn't for its cause. And this is just what we've become. And so it doesn't require us to talk just about Russia and Ukraine for us to talk about trauma and how we are making it very difficult for ourselves to create beauty and goodness in the world. We not only have a hard time then making sense of the stories that we tell, part of the difficulty with this is that shame tends to, as we like to say, one of its most potent effects is its isolating effect. Neurobiologically, as well as interpersonally, shame tends to separate us from ourselves and from one another. We have a shorthand when it comes to brain science. We say the brain does 5 things. And I think, oh wow, this is great. I'm going to get a master's in neuroscience in like 10 minutes. It's going to be great. 5 things. It senses, images, feels, thinks, and we behave. Now, this is an oversimplification, but when you think about what you sense, image, feel, think, and how you move with your body, shame tends to disintegrate, tends to disconnect our capacity to think coherently while we are feeling. It makes it impossible for us to create. It makes it very difficult for us to want to be close to anyone else, even people that we love, let alone people who are our enemies. This sense of isolation makes it very difficult for my brain to imagine any story other than the one that I tell myself about myself. So a simple example. The 10-year-old who walks into his father with his 92% on his math test. And nobody here is going to think this is abusive, and it isn't. And the father's going to say, that's really great. Where's the other 8%? He's wondering, right? And the kid has never gotten a 92% in his life. Where's the other 8%? Now, many of us, we were in that house. Many of us were in this house because if we're working really hard to do really well, we're working really hard to get the other 8%. Can I hear an amen? Here's the challenge. The challenge is the next time he's going to get a 93, but he's not going to tell his dad because he knows what the price is for paying. He's going to pay for that. And then he's going to get a 94%, and you know how this works. And the fact is, by the time it's all said and done, he's going to make straight A's. He's going to be a 5-star quarterback for his high school football team. He's going to go to the University of Tennessee. He's going to win a national championship. And for goodness sake, he's going to beat Georgia. And he will still be looking for the other 8%. And it won't matter how much beauty and goodness it appears that he's created on his resume internally, I will tell you, he will be in my office wondering why he's not good enough. Because this is what trauma does in very, very, very small ways. This is how evil operates. Evil does its best work in the middle of good work being done. Evil doesn't exist apart from goodness and beauty. It's parasitic upon it. What are we to do? When you read the end of the 5th chapter of Hosea, you read that God speaks of the kingdom of Judah as one that God is going to devour, as a lion does, because of their behavior. And you get to the very end of it, and you read that, but in their distress, once they've reached their nidus, once they've reached their low point, once they've reached the place where they are in enough distress, they will call to me. And when they do, I will come for them. We tell folks, in treating patients who will come in over many, many weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years, and they will complain about how they're not making changes yet. Why am I not making changes? And my attempt at being kind, but also direct with him, I would say it appears that you're probably not making changes because you haven't suffered enough. And of course, this doesn't sound very warm from a psychiatrist. I want to be very clear. It doesn't mean that you haven't suffered at all. Because as it turns out, human beings don't make changes until they've suffered enough. I can have two 35-year-olds. I was one of these 35-year-olds. I can have two 35-year-olds that walks into the internist's office and gets bad news about their cholesterol and about their blood pressure and all the other things. And one of them is immediately going to make a change because for them that's enough suffering. And another isn't going to make a change until 30 years later when they have crushing chest pain, even though they had the same information 30 years earlier. We change when we've suffered enough, and when we do, we remember what Jesus said. Because Jesus said, look, unless you change and become like little children, the kingdom of heaven just isn't going to work for you. It's not going to work. Because children are more than happy. When a toddler is in trouble, what does a toddler do? What do they do? If you're within earshot and a toddler is in trouble, what do? They come for you. They come yelling. They come crying. They have no trouble. They have no guile. They have no problem letting you know that they need help. And the reality is that the good news for our imaginations, even in the presence of trauma, is that beauty is still to be held. It's just going to be found in places we wouldn't have expected. There's a model for that. We're going to walk through very briefly and quickly the 4th verse of the 27th Psalm. It goes like this. One thing have I asked, this only will I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, that I may gaze upon his beauty, and that I may inquire in his temple. One thing. The first thing for us to say is that this is a writer who is going to be perseverant. He knows that this is going to be a lifelong journey. One thing have I asked. One thing am I going to do. That I'm going to dwell in the house of the Lord. This is not going to be a McDonald's drive-thru. I'm going to dwell. It is now estimated that if you are younger than 35 years of age, by the time you retire, you will have had 40 jobs. That's not much dwelling. If we are going to dwell, if the human soul is to be cared for, if political rancor is to be cured, we must practice dwelling, stillness. I am not a Luddite, but I can tell you that your technological devices are intended not to allow you to dwell. They are intended to distract you. They are intended to disintegrate your mind's activity. They are intended to make it difficult for you to pay attention for long periods of time. They are intended to make it difficult for you to be in the space with someone else who's angry with you and you don't leave the room. Dwelling is hard to do. This is what the writer says they are committed to doing over the long haul. I may dwell that I may gaze upon the beauty of the Lord. And as we said earlier, it's not hard to gaze at things that we're easily able to gaze at. We gaze at beauty easily. It's not easy for us to gaze at that which is really painful. In fact, it's so hard to gaze at it that we make a practice of not gazing at our own. Woman, behold your son. Jesus having a conversation from the cross with his mother and John. She has to look at him and look at John to have a conversation with a man who is beaten and bloodied beyond recognition. What would it be like for us to allow others to see the parts of us that we would deem to be the most ugly? The parts of us that we are most afraid of, the parts of us that frighten us the most. Tom Holland, in his outstanding work, Dominion, notices that Romans were really good at killing people. They had lots of ways of killing them. One of the most painful, humiliating ways that they used for crowd control was crucifixion. But he notes also that Romans themselves were embarrassed about this, and they wouldn't allow it in most of their literature. The archaeological findings are there to demonstrate that it happened. They killed hundreds of thousands of people this way, but even they were too embarrassed. And then he asks this question: how is it that of all of the effort that the Romans put into making sure that we don't know anything about crucifixion, there is one that we remember? Good Friday is good because of Easter. And if it weren't for Easter, we wouldn't know anything about Good Friday, but because of Easter, we look at Good Friday and say there is nothing more beautiful than a crucified Lord. But who of us here are interested in revealing the parts of ourselves that we hate the most to anyone who might see it as beautiful? To do that requires great courage. And so we dwell in order to gaze, in order to allow others to see my pain, in order for others to allow me to see theirs. And in so doing, we then also ask these questions. We inquire of the Lord. There are 4 questions. Where are you? This is Genesis 3:9. Where are you? God comes calling. And here's the thing. God's in the room even tonight asking this question. Where are you? Where are parts of you that you've worked really hard to keep out of the sight lines of anybody else that you know? Where are you? Number 2, what do you want? These are Jesus' first words in John's gospel. What do you want? Most of us, like myself, I'm afraid to answer. I'm like, okay, God, if I answer the question, just tell me that I'm not going to get the wrong answer. I just need to know that I'm going to know the right answer ahead of time. Most of us have a hard time even naming some of the things that we do want because we've practiced so long keeping them buried because they're too tangled up with our anxiety and our trauma. The third question, can you drink this cup? This is Matthew 20. When he asks John and James, whose mother had just asked them for the right and the left seats on Jesus' throne, and he's basically saying, look, if you're going to do this work, if you're going to dwell, if you're going to gaze, if you're going to inquire, if you're going to be the body of Jesus, if you're going to become people who create outposts of beauty and goodness in the world, it's important to know that this is hard to do and suffering is coming. And suffering is not just coming because people are going to do bad things to you, which is true. They're not going to like what you have to say, which is true. But it's going to come because you're going to do the hard work of peeling off the old ways that you used to live. And that's really hard to do. To say no to our addictions. To say no to my violence. To say no to my tendency toward empire. And by empire, I don't mean like becoming president of the United States. I mean empire like I have a little fiefdom in my own personal life that I'd like to have. And the last question, do you love me? This is Jesus talking to Peter in John 21, in which he asks this question as a way of getting to the reality that underneath Peter's response of, yes, of course you know that I do, is Jesus' awareness that there was something else waiting under Peter that Peter wasn't aware of yet himself. That Peter himself had parts of his own story that were still waiting to be discovered, waiting for someone to come find him who hadn't found it yet. In our work, in our practice, and what we are working to, as I casually say, try to export, is this notion of creating confessional communities, creating communities of people, not just in our clinical practice, but in all kinds of different venues where people have the opportunity to dwell and to gaze and to inquire. And when people are willing to do this, we discover that it is in the presence of individual relationships in which people are being seen, soothed, safe, secure, practicing over and over and over and over again, that outposts of beauty and goodness emerge. And in so doing, we're practicing for heaven. Jesus makes the comment in the Gospels, there will come a time when everyone will have to give an account of every idle word. And I read that sentence and I'm like, dang, I'm in trouble. I want to be like one of the last people in line. I want to see how everybody else does it, so that when I get there, I can have all my answers at the ready. And I want to suggest to us that our imaginations are so truncated by our trauma that even the way that I read that text makes it seem as if Jesus is still coming to kill me, just like Adam and Eve thought God was coming to do in Genesis 3. He's only looking for a way to put before everyone all the ways in which I've not done life very well. Just like happens when I go to work, just like happens at the cocktail parties, just like all the other places in my life where these parts of me think that I'm not enough because I'm still looking for the other 8%. But what if that's not how that conversation goes? What if when you come to give your account of every idle word, all those thoughts that you've had, Jesus asks you and you say, well, gosh, that was because of this. And then he says, well, tell me about that. What was that really about? And what if he is curious instead of condemning? What if he is on a mission to continue to create beauty and goodness even in the inquiry? What if his mission, even in his judgment of us, is to draw the beauty forth from us just as he was drawing beauty forth from what he saw in Genesis chapter 1? I want to suggest to us that a confessional community model is just one of a possible set of ways for us to reimagine with renewed imagination a world of beauty and goodness that God longs to create in and through us while he is transforming us to become the very beauty at the same time. You've been very kind. Thanks for your attention. I'm done.
Thank you, Kurt. On behalf of St. Paul and MBA, we are grateful for your insights, and we're excited to ask some questions. Before I do that, this book is one of the most significant books I've read in years, and really encourage you to delve into it because it just gives further vision to all that Kurt encouraged. So with the first question, I would be curious, as we seek to have communities of authenticity where we're known, where we're loved, and yet also have relationships where there's division, where there's distance, whether that be within the home or whether it be within a school community where we want to have people thriving. What would you say as you seek to cultivate a confessional community? What's a good first question to engage with that, or engage with somebody where you know that there's distance, but maybe even your own narrative, you don't, maybe not as even in touch, maybe haven't spent as much time in your office, really understanding what are the things that you're up against, just to start to have those conversations.
So I'll just say this, first of all. One thing that we tell people is that nothing that we do in a psychiatric consultation room, with the exception of prescribing medicine, nothing that we do in the psychiatric consultation room in terms of the conversations that we have with patients doesn't happen in the real world. Everything that happens in a psychotherapy session, in a group session, happens at Safeway's checkout line, happens in your kitchen, your bedroom, your boardroom. What's different is that in the psychotherapy consultation room, we're just explicit about everything. We're naming the things that are actually happening in the room, not just about the things that are outside there. We're not just talking about people and ideas and those people and those problems out there. We're talking about what's happening between you and me right now. The fact that we are explicit about things is important because one of the things that we do that is important is we like to use these words that we are constantly in the business of moving from the imagination to the incarnation. From imagination to incarnation. What does this mean? We are a very thoughtful, imaginative people, and we have all kinds of ideas. There are people in this room who have already had other thoughts about other people in this room. I can guarantee it before this night's over. And you're trying hard not to laugh because you know if you do, you're going to be found out as one of these people. So you're working even harder, right? I can just tell. But you see what I mean? We have all kinds of things that we imagine. And it's easy for us to keep things on the imaginative plane and not bring them into the incarnate plane. But the moment that I start to stop talking about something else and start talking what's happening between you and me, we can actually do things that I can't do when I'm just talking in the abstract. Does that make sense? And so when we talk about what's a good first question, I want to say it's actually not so much a question as much as an activity, and that is that we invite people to begin to tell their stories. And if I were to give you 20 minutes, this is, we have what we call a storytelling liturgy. It's actually a formal way that we have people tell stories. We give them 20 minutes to tell their story, and then we have some responses back and forth. The whole thing lasts about 45 minutes, and people will find themselves saying things, naming things in their story that they've not told anyone, because no one has asked them to tell their story this explicitly about a lot of things ever before. And then when they do, they find that other people find themselves feeling things in response to these stories that, of course, no one has ever said to them before that they feel because they've never told their story to anyone. This process goes on, and what we come to find is that so much, when you think about for example, when we think about our online activity, in which there's so much division, it is completely imaginative. It's completely in the abstract. No one's coming into a kitchen and sitting down and having a meal and having a conversation with one another. We're talking about people. We're not talking with people. And the more embodied we are and the more proximal we are with the people with whom we have great difference, with whom we then start to tell our story, and that story includes where did I come from and what was it like growing up in my house and how is it that I've come to be the person that I've come to be. All the material, none of which that gets included in my latest tweet. This becomes the way that we begin the process of telling our stories more truly. We said earlier that first we sense and then we make sense of what we sense. And this is what the brain is doing 24/7. We're just sensing and then we're making sense, and then we sense what we've made sense of, and then we make sense of that over and over and over again. And what trauma tends to do is it leaves me alone to tell my story in the privacy of my own brain. My story was never intended to be told primarily and only by myself. The question is not, what is my story? The question is, who are the people that are in my mind that are helping me tell my story as I tell it? I can guarantee you, you have a number of people who are in your life who are collaborative storytellers with you about who you are. The question is, who are they? And how true to who you are really intended to be is the story that you and these people are telling together. These people might not even be alive. They may be your parents who are dead, but they're still in your head telling you things about yourself that you still believe. And the only way that my brain is going to believe something different is if I have somebody else in the room helping me to tell a different story about myself in real time and space. Not just giving me information about my story, but giving me an embodied experience in which when I hear you hearing me, and I have the experience of being seen, soothed, safe, and secure, not as an abstraction, but because it's happening in the interaction that you and I are having right here and now, my mind and my body finally have a way to reimagine things that it otherwise could not imagine all by itself if you just give me something to read. Take this home, read this, and you'll be better. That's not how the brain most durably builds hope. It most durably builds hope in the presence of people, sometimes who are not like me, who are helping me tell my story very differently. This, we would say, is what Jesus does. The gospel comes and reimagines for us what the story of the world really is in the face of all of us who are telling the story in ways that are only broken. Okay, how was that? Is that enough? Is that good? Yeah.
So we're going to open up for question and answer. You can come along the aisles and line up. We do have 3 guidelines. There will be lots of shame if you break the guidelines. And we'll follow Kurt's alliteration. The 3 B's, be brief, be civil, and be a question. All right, we'll open up so you can come up. Who wants to be the first one?
This is like the most enjoyable time where everybody's waiting to see who's going to be the first person to come to the front and do that.
So I'd like to hear your story. The time when you had to face yourself at its most difficult time.
He's a ringer. Man, you people don't mess around. My story in 2 minutes. I'm the 4th of 4 sons. My parents were 45 when I was born. My brothers were 18, 16, and 11 when I was born. My oldest brother went off to college. I was born a week later. He came out at Thanksgiving and said, "What is this?" My father died when I was 17. I've lost all 3 brothers to cancer. My mother was extraordinarily anxious. When in 1962 you're pregnant and you're 45, you're anxious, you're worried. So before anything else, I was a source of anxiety. And in many respects, we might say through epigenetic downloading, I've lived with that for my entire life. There are parts of me that are perennially anxious, that worry that I'm not getting it right, that are convinced that I'm the dullest pencil in the box. There are parts of me that even now are worried that, like, whatever it is the case, you didn't get a 5-star talk from me tonight. I met Jesus when I was 13 at a church camp, and by the time that fall rolled around, I was in the middle of an existential crisis that waxed and waned for 20 years. I have had friendships that have come to find me over the course of my 6 decades of life that have been unending and durable and have been willing to know all the parts of me, especially the parts that I don't want to know about myself. And those friendships, my wife not the least, but also my kids, have been transformational because they have all collectively been the body of Jesus for me. I'm a professional sinner, as I said earlier today. I think that if you're good at something, you've been doing it for a long time, you can call yourself a pro. I'll stop with that for now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Every other question should be easy.
show me boundaries that are necessary in a relationship. So I don't know how to put words to that. Can shame be seen or described as a kindness or a blessing from the Lord?
Right. So another way to put this, you tell me if I'm getting this right. Like, is there a way that shame is actually helpful and effective in the world? Is that fair to say? Yeah. And the answer is absolutely yes, a resounding yes. Important to know that when you read the biblical narrative, shame is there, and we would like to say that shame is a signal that God has built into the universe, the fabric of the universe, to indicate to us that trouble is on the way. It's a signal. The problem for us in shame is not that we experience it, the problem is how we respond to it. And one of the things that didn't happen in the garden, and that for the most part doesn't happen for us, is that when we experience it, we turn away. We turn away from ourselves, and we turn away from each other, we turn away from God. Now, you could have a long conversation about what was happening in Genesis chapter 3, how it is that there's a conversation between a snake and a woman, and we don't hear anything from her husband. This is problematic. Somebody's not coming for somebody in the middle of shame that I would indicate and I would suggest actually is happening in the conversation long before any fruit gets eaten. There's a wounding that's taking place even in the context of the conversation. Kind of like, where's the other 8%? We could go on and on about that, but I won't. But we will say this. There are certain things, there are behaviors that we enact as human beings for which shame is absolutely the proper response. And its response is to help us sense and see that there is a problem. Part of our difficulty is that we are historically so disconnected from each other in the first place that when someone feels shame, they're by themselves when it's happening anyway, and they're going to do everything they can to make sure nobody else sees it. And the more we work to make sure nobody sees it, the more we empower it to continue to drive us further into isolation. What we need, and this is how it is that when you read the scriptures, so often when you talk about sin, you read the scriptures talking about shame at the same time. Far more often than it talks about guilt. Because guilt is far more technically seen as a legal issue. Shame is a neurophysiologic event that happens. It begins as early as 15 to 18 months of age. We're good at it. We're practiced at it. And when we experience it, we need someone else to come for us. And we need to respond to that. And the response is to be able to say, yes, I sense this because this thing that I'm sensing is reflective of the thing that I've actually done. And now your coming for me is going to help me take care of this problem. It's going to help me repent. But even repentance does not happen on its own. When we read the story of the prodigal son, the prodigal goes away and then he stops and he comes to his senses, and what does he do? He imagines something in his head about what? About his father and about his father's place. He doesn't just decide only all by himself. He has to count on something that is in his memory about another relationship that can call to him. And so shame is absolutely necessary in order to form us. What's challenging for us, and we say this even in the confessional communities, that we expect shame to show up, and the question is, are you going to stay in the room when it does? In order for us to do the work, that's that whole safety thing again. Like, it's the restraint that has to come, like, well, there are things that I have to do differently. This is what repentance is. I'm turning around and going in different directions, and shame is a signal to tell me about when some of those things are happening.
What do you think is going on when there's extreme trauma, but it doesn't truncate, or your word was shatter, the ability to imagine? In fact, it's the opposite. What would you say is going on with that?
Well, I'm not sure what exactly what you're referring to when you say it's the exact opposite. I mean, I think it's fair to say that human beings are remarkably resilient. Remarkably resilient. There's all kinds of trauma that happens all over the world in which people are able to survive. People are able to resiliently move through this. It's not to suggest that trauma only has one outcome. It is to suggest that even in the presence of trauma, however, there will be elements and parts of our imaginative process that when it comes to us then doing new things, It becomes difficult for us. Now, this doesn't mean it's that everyone is the same across the board. There are plenty of people who experience trauma and who demonstrate with their life that there's a lot of goodness and beauty that they're creating even in the face of that. We're really talking about what is it like for those of us for whom that isn't the case, and what would be a potential antidote for that, what is a potential response to that. So I think that there are people who can respond with creative beauty and goodness even in the face of that. And we see this in a lot of artistic expression. We see that.
Hey, thanks for your words tonight. I'm curious, you said at one point that we cannot give anything that we ourselves do not have. And I have felt that to be true in work and in life. It seems that rest and when I'm anxious, I just exude anxiety often to others.
Yeah.
But as a Jesus follower, it seems like the opposite must be true, that I have to at all times believe that I'm able to give something that I don't myself have because of the presence of the Spirit in our midst and in actually doing more than what I myself have. And it seems like the flip of that is often true, where I'm at least inclined to think that the greatest evil that's ever been committed seems like all of that evil is not contained in that person, but it somehow grows. Like it's more than what, I thought I was just saying that one thing, but I've created this huge mess that's much more than what I had in my mind or heart to do. So I'm curious if you could kind of reconcile those two things. Like, how is it that we at the same time believe that the Spirit is doing far more abundantly than we could ask or imagine, and also evil is doing far more than we even thought we were beginning to do, but also neurobiologically or interpersonally, like we have these limits to what we can provide and give and receive.
So let me just thank you for all your questions. I'm going to just reflect on something that you said. You said, how do we reconcile two things? And I want to just kind of pull the camera back and just be curious about it and note that there are a lot of things that are great, deep mystery that we have a hard time reconciling. Would that be fair to say? This might be one of those things. Like, for instance, I'm someone who frequently wonders, okay, in this interchange that's happening in this confessional community or in this psychotherapy session or in the exchange I'm having with my checkout, with the clerk at the checkout in Safeway, like, where does the Holy Spirit end and I begin? Would that be fair to say? And when I'm feeling like I don't have enough energy left, like, where's the energy coming from the Holy Spirit? And all these kinds of questions that I would like to reconcile. Would that be fair to say? And I would say the fact that I'm even asking the question is a reflection there is a part of me that needs to know the right answer to this. I need to know where the line is. And I need to know the line, ultimately, in order to prevent myself from feeling shame from not finding it. And this is where I would say that most of the time when I'm having these kinds of challenges, trying to reconcile things, I'll speak for myself, it is often a function of me trying to figure this out by myself. I'm typically, when I say to my friends, in my own circle, my own kind of confessional community, when I say, this is where I am, I'm trying to reconcile these things, and they start to ask me questions about, well, what part of your own story is being activated here? How is this not just about the Holy Spirit, and how is this not just about a theological question, but how is this about other actually bigger things for you? How is it that even the possibility that you're exploring this question is about God trying to get to parts of you that are still 8 and 10 and 15 years of age that didn't get to do their work when they were that age? Does that make sense? And so I think we find that, I tell people behind every question, under every question is a longing. And sometimes that question is like, how many cups of sugar go in this recipe? It's that simple, right? But we might also say, like, I want to know how many cups are in that recipe because I really, really want to make a cake that tastes good. It's a longing for how the cake is. You might say, well, that's not about a longing. No, it's about creating beauty and goodness. It just has to have to do with a cake. And so much of our questions have to do with longings that have been wounded by grief. And the fact that we don't have the answers to those things that we can't yet fully integrate, and that creates distress for us, has a lot more to say about my worry that if I don't get this right, there's going to be trouble. In those moments, I'm really wondering, what is it and where is it that I imagine Jesus being? And do I imagine him being able to be in the room with me and say, like, yeah, we don't really understand this, but like, we're okay. I'll stop with that. Yeah.
First, this is really thoughtful. The sort of integration of psychology and theology here, really very helpful, I think.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So there are a lot of successful people in this room, I think, and community leaders and others, and many of us are good at image management. We're good at showing people what we want to show them, and hiding what we want to hide. And you've invited us to think about not doing that.
Right.
So very practically, let's say someone is here today and they decide, I'm going to go to work tomorrow, I'm going to go home today, I'm going to do whatever I do, and I'm going to decide to take that mask off, I'm going to commit to that. What's the first step? Very practically, do you just jump in the deep end of the pool, tear the mask off,
Sure.
You
Yes,
barely
go ahead.
pull it up.
Yeah. It's a great question. I'm aware that like it could feel like I'm setting you up to do that very thing. Like just strip and get in the deep end of the pool, right? You look like you're looking forward to that. So, right, okay. So, and in the same way, I would say it is true that doing this work, we tell the people who are in these confessional communities that we run in our practice and that are being exported, and the people are doing in the community that are not part of the practice, that this is very hard to do, and we don't want people to think that that somehow magically just telling your whole story all at once. This is a thing that we begin and we're going to continue for the rest of our lives. In the confessional communities, I'm going to get to your answer in just a moment, but in the confessional communities, we have this storytelling liturgy that I mentioned, right? And that is a process for each person who's entered. It takes about 45 minutes to do that for each person. But we say you're going to do that process, but then you're going to be in this community and you're going to continue that process until you're no longer in the community, for however long it is that you're with us and you move on or whatever it is. Like your story is something that you tell all day, every day. What we're doing in the community is helping you tell it extremely explicitly. Because the more we are aware, the more I am attuned to what I'm sensing, imaging, feeling, thinking, and doing, the less on autopilot I am. And the less on autopilot I am, the less my brainstem and my right and lower hemispheres are not completely in charge of what I'm doing. I can actually let my prefrontal cortex come to the party and reflect and make a decision in a way that's actually useful. And so one of the ways that we do this is, and in both the Soul of Shame and the Soul of Desire, there's a bit of a template at the end of the books in which we talk about a model for how you go about doing this. One way would be to say, I'm going to meet with one of my friends, somebody that I trust, right? We're not just pulling people off the street, somebody that I trust, and I'm going to take 20 minutes and tell them my story. And I'm going to ask them if they would be willing to do this. And I'm going to ask them to be curious about these questions that we talk about in the Soul of Desire, like where are you and what are you feeling and what are you sensing? All those kinds of questions. For the purpose of beginning to practice this. This is not a matter of in 20 minutes I have to tell every one of my deepest, darkest secrets, right? This is like when you have people who have been starving. You don't give them a full filet mignon dinner, right? You have to usher them back into a place where they can be nourished little by little by little by little. And that's the same thing that we're doing here. For those of you, I talked about this at the school today, for those of you who are, I don't know how many of you are fans of The Chosen, I'm a fan, and one of the things that you see in this online TV series is that Jesus has no intention of moving his project forward quickly. And of course it's irritating everybody. It's irritating Peter. It's like chop. Like we've got so many options for Instagram. Like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you letting us move this forward? I think that part of the difficulty for us is that we feel the urgency of our time so acutely that we have come to believe that we must meet it with a response that is similarly urgent, swift, impactful. And as it turns out, Christianity was virtually unknown to the public eye for its first 100 years. It was not known by the Romans on the public landscape. These little communities, these little outposts of beauty and goodness, little by little by little by little. My encouragement is for you to pick one or two friends and to begin to tell your story truly, to be prayerful, to look for the Spirit, to do work in that space. And then we don't have to worry about building an empire. We don't have to worry about like doing this right. We're just going to do this faithfully. And the more that we do this, the more truly my story is told. And this is what we come to find, is that if my story is told more truly because you know more about my story, I'm less anxious, I'm less ashamed. That means I am more willing to take the kind of risks to create the things that I've been waiting to create before the foundations of the world. And these are things that I may not even know that I want to do until you help me tell my story more truly. And this is what I believe Jesus was coming to do with everybody that he meets. He's coming to tell our story more truly. And evil wants us to stop paying attention. He doesn't want to pay attention to that. It's hard, it's difficult. He didn't say, anyone who wants to follow me, come pick up your Tesla. Come on. Right? This whole notion of bearing a cross includes what it means for us to tell our stories more truly. Because it's absolutely the case that the very thing that each of us want, I want to be seen, so like I long for all that. And at the same time, the very thing that I most deeply and desperately want is the thing that terrifies me like nothing else does. The whole notion of actually being seen is not something that you want as much as you'd like to think it is. Because once it gets here, it will be hard for us when someone looks at us in the eye in these spaces that we are afraid to be seen. If we're willing to stay in the room, though, everything is transformed. Yeah.
Time for one last question.
Is there a way to inspire your parents to see or soothe or, parent up, advanced stage parents?
How much money is this answer worth to you? One of the questions that comes to us commonly is, what are we supposed to do with the fifth commandment? When I've had parents that have behaved badly, and perhaps even continue to behave badly. We take care of a lot of people who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and whose parents are having a hard time being adults. Now, at the same time, we have to acknowledge that we live in a culture increasingly that wants to, and we have to be careful about this. I was talking with some folks last week, parents who are actually people that I know that are working really, really hard at being people of integrity as parents. They want to, like, if there are things that they and their adult kids, if they want to work some things out with their adult kids, they're like at the ready. They want to talk about it. They want to do, and these are parents who are doing their own work. And their kids won't have anything to do with them. Because if the parents don't understand and see life exactly as their adult children see it, then their parents are not seeing life the way it actually is. And this is problematic because we live in a culture that is making it increasingly difficult for people to live in the real world. So these are two different problems, but they're related. And for those folks who might be in maybe, well, I'll just say someone who might be in your shoes, for example. I like to say that until and or unless our parents are medically or psychiatrically impaired and are unable to do what they need to do, they are always to be the parents. It is always their job to be the initiators in relationships. It's always their job to be curious. Now, sometimes they do that, and the adult and the kids don't respond. And that's a suffering for the parents. When kids go to their parents and say, gosh, I'd like to have some conversation about this, and parents aren't responding, I will say, eventually, you're going to learn, well, how dry is the well, and how many times do you want to put your bucket down that dry well? And as such, there's nothing that you as a child can do to get your parent to do what you need them to do, any more than you had the chance to do it when you were 6. What I would say is that, even for those of us, we say that the true sign of maturity is when we are able to forgive our parents. It's a true sign of maturity. And to be able to forgive also includes our capacity to name effectively what it is that we need to forgive our parents for. We have to name those things, not to throw them under the bus, not to criticize them, it's not to condemn them. It is to name what has been true about my story and then to not hold them responsible for my emotional well-being. And my capacity to begin to do that requires that I'm also having other people who are helping me tell my story more truly. Here's the tricky thing is this. Even when you have found other folks who are enabling you to live honorably before your parents, right? We often hear that command, honor your father and your father and your mother. It means really in the Hebrew, live honorably before your parents. That's what it means to do. Live honorably before them so that it may go well with you in the land. And what that means then is for you to be a person of integrity, of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, all the things, without holding them responsible, despite the fact that the longing that you have for them to see you will go with you to your grave. And there is a certain suffering in that, for which Jesus would look at you and say, gosh, I know exactly what it's like to be you, because I had all kinds of friends who I wanted to, I needed as resources, and there they were asleep the night before they killed me. And so I think it's important for us to know that Jesus knows this, and he's not worried about it. And I wish you well. I think we're done.
Kurt, thank you. There's a lot to think about there. I really appreciate it. A lot to wrestle with. And one of our hopes for having these kind of evening conversations is that it will be a catalyst for new kinds of conversations to happen in a community, in a friendship, and a relational level. So as one kind of processes and digests a lot of what's been talked about tonight, we encourage you to do that with friends and in community. As we leave, I want to leave both with thanks and with a few invitations. Right outside, we'll be selling different copies of Kurt's book. As we've mentioned, he has 3 books, another one on the way. We have 2 of them outside. Anatomy of the Soul, his first work, is available in paperback form, and The Soul of Desire, his most recent one, is both out there as well, and we commend those to you. In addition, want to extend an invitation to all of you here to join the Trinity Forum Society, which is the community of people which help further the Trinity Forum's mission of cultivating, curating, and disseminating the best of Christian thought and providing space for conversations like this one today. There are many benefits in being a Trinity Forum Society member, including a subscription to our quarterly readings, many of which will be outside, and several of the ones that will be out there will be in some ways story forms illustrating a lot of what we've talked about tonight, whether it's Babette's Feast, Brave New World, other stories which illustrate some of the themes that we've discussed. It also includes our daily What We're Reading list of curated reading recommendations. And for all of you who are here tonight, we will also offer a signed copy of Kurt's book of your choice when you join tonight or with your membership of $100 or more. So hope that you will avail yourself of that invitation. In addition, if anyone here would like to be a sponsor for future events and join the group of folks who are, please see me, see my colleague Molly Wicker, or Byron Smith, or Sam Funk. If you just raise your hands, people can kind of see where you are. Well, we'd love to have you join the list of sponsorships. As Brad mentioned, This coming spring is our 10-year anniversary, so we are planning an even larger event than normal and would love to have you be part of that. Finally, it's always appropriate to end with thanks with events like this. As you might imagine, even though there's a few of us sitting up here on stage, it's largely people who are not on stage who made tonight work. So I want to thank again our sponsors whose generosity helped make this evening possible. Thank our partners, Brad Joya and Will Horton, and your team at St. Paul and at MBA. Thank you so much. And in particular, I want to thank Langan Coleman at MBA and Jeanette Leggett at St. Paul, as well as a few volunteers that we've had from St. Paul, including Ashley Larmer and Lauren Hester. Thanks also to our photographer, Allison Akins, our videographer, Barry McAllister, my able colleagues, Nikki Sheffield, Molly Wicker, and Brian Daskin. Thanks above all to Kurt for your thoughts tonight.
Could we add God to that list?
Say that again?
Could we add the Lord God to that list?
Sure, of course, always, it's implied. And finally, thank you to each of you for your presence and your participation tonight. Good night.